Joshua chapters 5 and 6 today, which is the story of the fall of Jericho. I think that's one of those stories that everybody knows a bit about. You hear there was a song or something when kids about the walls of Jericho tumbling down or something like that. I can vaguely remember it on the fringes of my memory, but I don't recall any of the specific details. But this is the story of what happens and where that comes from. It's a little bit mixed up, this story, because it talks about the kings in the land of Canaan, because the land of Canaan being several different kingdoms, and so there are lots of different kings. It talks about their hearts melting with fear when they hear about what God did with the River Jordan in terms of bunging it up so the Israelites could come through. But then it talks about God saying to Joshua that he needs to circumcise all the blokes ready to do the fighting. It's like, oh, hang on, I thought they were all done. And it does actually conveniently go on to then explain thereafter that no, they weren't actually all done, because all those people who left Egypt are now dead and this is a new bunch of people. But there's a conflict there, because there was the rule in Leviticus, maybe it was Leviticus I think, that all newborn boys had to be circumcised on the 8th day. So apparently the Israelites just completely ignored that, and God was cool with it until now. And they're just about to go into battle. Oh no, hang on, you need to get a flint knife and do things. A terrible time going to battle. Fortunately, God seems to acknowledge that this would make it a terrible situation in which to go into battle, so it is noted that they take time to heal before they go and do their fighting. It perhaps won't surprise you that then it gets a little weird. So Joshua's coming up to Jericho, and on the way there he meets some random dude with a sword. Asks, is he a goodie, is he a baddie? And this guy says, neither, I've been sent to head up the army of the Lord. And Joshua bows down and gets all very excited. Apparently quite happy just to accept what this guy says at face value, but it sounds like it's okay anyway. There's a strange part of it, because it just sounds like a random dude with a sword, but this random dude with the sword tells Joshua that he's standing on holy ground and therefore he needs to take his sandals off, which made me think maybe this guy's an angel or something. Doesn't say that he's an angel, but it sounds like it might be that. Don't know. I mean, maybe I'm finally getting tuned into the weirdness. So anyway, this guy who's the commander of the army of the Lord / random dude / angel tells Joshua what his strategy needs to be for taking on the city of Jericho. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the plan given to Joshua is rather odd. So it begins with, you have to get your entire Israelite army. You're going to march it around the entire city of Jericho. I don't know how big the city of Jericho is. I assume not massive, so I don't think this is a particularly difficult task. But there's going to be a lot of soldiers, I guess. Doesn't actually make that explicit, but either way, whole Israelite army march around the city of Jericho. 7 priests in front of the Ark of Covenant playing trumpets, everybody else behind, back to base, feet up, read a book, whatever. This is then repeated for 6 days, exactly the same as the whole army round, priests doing Ark of the Covenant, back to base, read a book. On the 7th day though, they're going to go around the city of Jericho 7 times. And then after the 7th time, it sounds like there's going to be an extra long blast on the trumpets. And at that point, all the Israelite soldiers need to shout. Doesn't say what they have to shout, just shout. And then the walls of Jericho are going to fall down, apparently. I must admit, if I was in Joshua's shoes and I just inherited this sort of somewhat poisoned chalice of being in charge of the Israelites, and some random dude I met with a sword said he was the commander of the army of the Lord and that I should do this to conquer a fortified city, there'd be some scepticism, but none of that seems to come across. But sure enough, anyway, they do all this, and the wall falls down, and then the soldiers flood into Jericho, kill everybody apart from Rahab and her family. Hadn't twigged that they were in Jericho, but they were apparently. And it says they even kill all the children and the donkeys. So I think we've kind of covered quite a bit of that, haven't we? So I think we're just going to leave that, move on. It's a serious question over whether this is a true story or not, or a literal true story anyway. So I think we'll conveniently just sort of skip over that for now on the basis that we've addressed all the random killing of lots of people and the slightly over absolute language. But from the Israelite perspective, a nice simple victory by the sounds of it, and all is well. And it says that Joshua's reputation throughout the land starts to spread. I meant to say, before the Israelites attack Jericho, there's a word from Joshua to all of them saying, make sure you don't do any plundering or looting or anything like that, because that's God's going to disapprove and it'll bring shame on Israel and all the rest of it, and the destruction of Israel and things like that. It doesn't sound like anyone actually then does that. But he does say that any bronze, iron, gold or silver, that does need to be taken. That goes into God's treasury. I'm not sure what happens with God's treasury. Is it used for the good of the people or something? Because it's not obvious that God has any use for that. And it's not a great look, is it, in terms of, okay, we've just bashed down this thing, we've killed all the children and the donkeys and everybody else, we've nicked all their gold and the silver, and it's going to this temple thing for God. There's a challenge in that sort of stuff. My feeling is that it's not obvious that it matters that much, in the sense that there's some serious questions about whether this stuff is literally true anyway. I mean, we're talking about a story where an army walks around a city that's made of massive rocks, blowing trumpets and shouting, and the whole thing falls down. It's don't get me wrong, if God exists, I appreciate that he could quite happily knock down those walls and do it through that manner. That's absolutely fine. But it is at least possible this is just a story to illustrate something or various things. And it's a tricky one to know what to do with, but it doesn't feel like that's critical. It's also interesting that Rahab and her family are spared. So whilst it says that everybody is killed, I mean, it does say Rahab and her family are not, but the point is it's talking about going in and wiping out everybody. It clearly isn't everybody, is it? Because Rahab turned out to be a goody, despite her profession, which God raises an eyebrow at, and she's spared. So, and presumably her family aren't a bunch of saints either. So that does seem to tie back into the idea that it's saying everybody is killed, but probably not everybody is killed. It seems there are exceptions, and it's just glossing over those for the sake of dramatic storytelling, perhaps. I hadn't intended to cheat by reading more broadly than the Bible itself, but given how you interpret this stuff, it does clearly seem to need some sort of historical context. I've been reading this, which is not a light read. I probably won't do a tangent video on this just because it's not... it's a bit complicated. But it is interesting how this is a bunch of different historical, biblical scholars type people, plenty of whom are atheists, clearly. And it's talking about how you analyse history and what's there and what the standards are for proof beyond reasonable doubt of certain things. And it does seem that there is not a great deal of historical evidence for a lot of this stuff. And also, I think it seems that generally agreed that the way the Bible was put together, certainly in the Old Testament, it's a combination of different things. Some of it just narration, some of it a little bit of embellished storytelling, some of it a little bit about doing morals, that sort of thing. So it does lead me to think that most of this stuff is interesting context in terms of the big picture, but the actual individual details perhaps don't matter that much. It could be a total cop-out. I don't know. Well, we'll keep going anyway and see how we do. So yeah, that was the story of how Jericho fell to the Israelites. I get the impression that there's going to be quite a bit more of this sort of thing going on. We'll look at the next part of that in the next video.